Nasus's passive is still this.
Jo, Nasusova pasivka je, že dostává lifesteal. Ambessa má dash po každém spelu a Nasus dostává lifesteal. Staré Lolko versus dnešní.
Man, look at the Hecarim go. This is only a couple minutes into the game and he's
To budou homeguardy, ne? Na Hecarima.
already so fast. Wow, that turret only gave 150 gold? What on earth? These days that turret gives over 2 kills worth of gold. Oh my gosh, the starting items. Look at all those
Já jsem mohl koupit tyhle ten item a k tomu ještě tak 6 potek, no, a Vardo.
potions. He got a mana pot. Ah, the double jungling. This was actually the big brain strats
Jo, každá botlinka před začátkem hry si mu zabila jungle camp jeden, no, dřív.
back in the day. Dude, do you remember old League? Cause I do. The game, clunkier. The graphics, uglier. The players, stink.
Grafika byla hezčí, ale nebylo to tak přehledný jak dneska, no. Já se mi líbilo tady tohle. Mělo to takové své kouzlo, prostě, no.
And it just looks terrible. Yet it was awesome at the same time. I really think a lot of people don't appreciate.
Vidíš, vypadá to hezky prostě, je to takový, to prostě, je to osobitý. Není to generický, je to osobitý, že jo?
Just how much
Mně přijde, že to vypadá jako Warcraft prostě. Já jsem vždycky měl rád Warcraft a tu grafiku toho Warcraftu.
this game has changed. And if you're a newer player, it's
Z kterého to jako vzešlo ta hra, že jo?
definitely changed way more than you already thought. Nearly every aspect of the game is
Jaký model, Soraky, vole.
monumentally different. Wards, runes, masteries, items, champion abilities, champion
Urgotovo starý účko se prostě jenom vyměnil s někým.
reworks, champion reworks. You know how the map changes? Because of course it does. We have elemental drakes. That's a thing, right? It's always been a thing. Heck no, it was not always a thing. In fact, the only way the map used to change and transform was the seasonal maps. Bring it back, Riot. League of Legends history is jam-packed full of interesting, fun, and cool unique things that used to be in the game and no longer are. And to Riot's credit, some things are actually quite a bit better today, and of course some
Ten starý Galio, no, to si taky pamatuju dost. Co to je, ne?
are actually quite a bit better today, and of course some things are a little worse.
Jak se kempům říká kempy, tak dřív tam měli ohniště, teď tam není nic a furt se tomu říká kemp. No, to mě nikdy nenapadlo. True.
Let's take a little trip today down memory lane and look back on some really cool stuff. I can guarantee you that at least one thing in this video you will have either completely forgotten.
Teď tam ten Gnomen tak sedí jak debil, že? A čumí prostě do zdi a dřív tam aspoň chillovali u ohýnku, no.
About or never.
Teď nemají žádný smysl ani na té mapě vlastně, že? Tam jenom stojí v rohu. Nesedějí tam prostě z nějakého důvodu. Starý Erko Galio měl starý Erko, že tauntnul všechny okolo sebe, no. Tak jak má dneska ten velký kruh Galio, že skočí z výšky na nějakého spoluhráče, tak měl ten kruh byl stejně velký v podstatě, akorát je všechny tauntnul na sebe a tauntnul asi nad vědomou na 3 sekundy, no. To bylo hodně OP účko do teamfightu, ale ten champ byl useless jinak, no. Strašně. Když měl takhle OP účko, tak byl useless, většinou.
Even knew existed, so make sure you watch until the end. But before we hop in, this video today is sponsored by NordVPN. If you're still not using Nord, which is the absolute best VPN on the market, then trust me, you
Dostal jsem hate, že neukazuju v reakcích, vole, reklamy od tvůrců videí, na který koukám, tak koukneme i na reklamu.
are missing out. Because internet privacy protection is required at an
Ale každý už viděl reklamu na NordVPN, že jo, tak to skipneme, dobře, no. Tady máte discount, hoši, hele. Jestli to chcete, discount. Go.
3-day money back guarantee. We all know how much that you should value your physical and mental health, and that totally makes sense. But another huge thing that you should value is your internet privacy.
Tak neměl bych si problém, ale na reklamu na NordVPN a Surfshark a jiný VPN, už jsem viděl asi 150krát.
And security, and you can start that easily today by using the link in the description. Simply going to nordvpn.com/exilvpn. This is a great opportunity to take cybersecurity much more seriously today at an affordable cost. Thank you again to NordVPN for the sponsor. I want to talk about a lot of different throwback stuff. It's going to range from
můžu dát titulky asi, co?
items to specific champion abilities, the jungle, dragons, and more. So if I did leave out something that you want me to talk about, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I could make it in a separate video and I could continue in this series.
Dobře. Items.
Let's go back first to the year 2016 and talk about jungle. One thing you will see repeated a lot today is that certain mechanics from this game weren't necessarily completely removed from League of Legends, just tended to move to a different place. A good example is this first item we have here, Hunter's Potion. This is an item I completely forgot.
To se stavilo do jungle, ty vole, myslím, že ne? Nebo ne? Já myslím, že jo.
About until rewatching some old games. It built out of refillable potion and was pretty cheap. It was similar to Corrupting Pot, kind of, in the sense that it had charges, but it didn't have any burn. It was a useful jungle sustain item, having up to 5 charges that could be gained back one at a time by killing large monsters. It was
skoupil ten jungle item, který stál 300 pade, refillable, a pak jsi dokoupil ten, no.
During the mid-season.
Protože ty kempy tě nehýlovaly, když jsi zabíjel, tak jsi musel mít tohle na sustain, no, koupit.
Of 2019, which happened because Riot wanted to make the process of clearing jungle much healthier and more consistent. Junglers can survive in today's game without this item because the jungle doesn't really beat you up the way it used to. The reason that jungle used to hurt a lot more is that you used to have to make a choice where you could actually start and whether or not you could even full clear. The two options for the jungle items were Talisman and Machete. Talisman was the AoE burn, while the
Machete byla na autoataky a tohle byl prostě na spely a AoE burn.
Machete was better for auto-attack heavy junglers. Anyone who could start the Talisman could effectively clear the Raptors, think Amumu or Hecarim. However, by starting Talisman and not the Machete, taking your Gromp and taking your buffs would require a lot more time and might not be totally feasible on your first clear. Up until literally this patch, junglers did not need this item for the last couple of years, and the big reason for that is that the jungle intrinsically had much more sustain built in. Smiting would heal you, and taking Gromp would heal as well. But now that we've all played in the new jungle for Season 13, what's interesting is that we might see something like this return, but it's probably still unlikely. While it's true that the new jungle has less sustain, Riot is looking to buff that base value. They clearly want the system of jungle health to happen automatically.
Tohle video je rok starý, takže berte to v potaz, no. Mně přijde, že ta jungle je teďka víc tanky a dává méně damage, no. Tak zhruba nějak to funguje, co?
Through the clearing of camps, rather than being tied to an item.
Než v tom videu.
Or I guess just in this case, the pet item.
Jak běhá, ne? Tak běhá i předklon.
And again, that's kind of the pattern that you're going to see today. A lot of things we used to have just happen automatically now as League is much more streamlined. Another good example is the home guard effect. You know how at the start of the game...
Tohle to tak ze season 5 nebo 6, no. Ten home guard. To strašnou botu, na topu třeba, když dal top, a na tu botu jsi mohl koupit upgrade, takže jsi měl home guardy, což je ten efekt, který ti dá zrychlení, že běžíš rychle z báze. To jsi mohl koupit na botu už v jakýkoliv minutě v podstatě. A vždycky si rychle doběhl na linku, no. Takže všichni topaři to rušovali, doběhli na top rychle, že jo, s tou botou, šli do tradu, vytradili, utekli, resetli a zase naběhli zpátky na linku a nestráceli miniony a byli furt na léně s full HPčkama, no. Bylo to strašně OP.
And when you die and
hrál se s tím strašně moc Hecarim na to.
Come late game, you run faster out of base. It kind of seems weird that people have been calling that the home guard or saying get your home guards. Why do players have a name for that? Well, that's because for about the first 7 years of League of Legends, home guard wasn't something that was a given or happened automatically. You had
to musel koupit na tu botu přímo jako enchant.
Had to buy it on your boots. Boot enchantments are incredibly nostalgic. After completing your tier 2 boots, you could purchase one more upgrade for pretty cheap, and these would give additional...
Prodávali upgrade na boty, tohle to dávalo nějaký attack speed asi, když je to alakrity, že? Captain nevím, co dával, Distortion, už nevím, co dělali ty ostatní, ale byly nějaký na AP damage, AD damage, attack speed, něco, nevím, tanky asi a ten home guard, no. Samozřejmě home guard byl asi jako nejlepší, no.
Bonuses. The options were Alacrity, Captain, Distortion, Furor, and home guard. Several of these things are still in the game today, just found in a different place. The Distortion boots are a perfect example. Buying these was basically like having the Nimbus cloak and Cosmic Insight runes, but combined into one. These boots and home guards were pretty popular, but some of the others were a bit less interesting. The Captain enchantment was essentially just a Janna passive, which is more boring than lightning speed Zoomy boots that let you run out of base, and there's a couple of other ones like Alacrity was just extra movement speed. It was okay on a champion like...
Tak Alacrity bylo movement speed, no, ale jako homeguardy byly prostě to, no, byly strašně powerful.
Garen, who could go Swifty boots into the Alacrity enchantment, but other than that you didn't see it too much. By the way, the Home Guard enchantment was actually a rush item for a couple of champions. It was not totally uncommon to see your Hecarim...
Dřív bylo jako komplikovanější, možná i složitější. No, jako dneska je tam hodně věcí, které ti to strašně zjednodušují. Třeba, že když někdo zabije draka, tak to vidíš, jo, na té mapě, nebo barona. Dřív, když někdo zabil barona a ty jsi tam měl vizi, tak jsi to nevěděl, dokud jsi tam nepřišel. Tak ty si třeba minutou mohl myslet, že enemy tým jako nezabil barona a přitom ho už měli dávno. U Draků to stejný. Nebyl profesor, který ti ukazoval spavny jungle campu. Ta hra ti sama nedoporučovala, jaký máš maxovat spely správně. Když jsi byl v jungli, tak ti neukazovala ti ta hra, na který kempy máš jít první. Asi to skládání těch run a masterek bylo daleko těžší, protože jich bylo strašně moc, že jo. Dneska máš 6 run a 3 jakoby statový runy, takže máš 9 run. Dřív jsi jich měl prostě 30 a 35 nebo kolik. Že? V jistých ohledech to bylo takový komplikovanější o dost, no. Já si myslím, že dneska je to těžší mechanicky, ale je to lehčí z té itemové a teoretické. A dřív to bylo těžší z té teoretické stránky a lehčí z té gameplayové asi. Makro bylo možná dřív těžší kvůli těm drakům a baronům a asi tak, no, nevím. Nedávali vlci vizi, když jsi smajtnul, to bylo asi rok nebo 2 ve hře, no. Že si smajtl vlky v enemy jungli nebo ve svojí, tak tam byl takový duch. A vždycky, když kolem těch vlků někdo šel v enemy, tak ten duch šel za nima. Když jsi viděl, že tam někdo chodí.
Top lane back in 2015 build the...
Ty starý runy byly dobrý, že jsi mohl vymýšlet prostě všelijaký jako teorie crafty, no. A taky ve starém Lolku bylo jako víc fajn, že jsi mohl hodně čempů hrát AD nebo API. Dneska máš strašně málo čempů, který může hrát obojím, jakoby, na oba styly. Protože samozřejmě je to pro ně lehčí na vybalancování, že jo, když je jeden čemp jenom AD nebo jenom tank. Dřív no bylo hodně čempů, který šli AD i AP. Dneska už jich moc není.
These first and look for a huge TP play into the bot lane. By building these early game, it was also sort of like a
to dělal Hekarim furt. Dělal Ignite TP, Homeguardy a prostě byl všude na AP, no.
Pseudo teleport or Quinn ultimate, helping you get back to lane faster. A beloved item.
Já jsem i já hrál na tom topu, jak to bylo OP, že to bylo strašně zábavný. A to byla moje nejhorší role, ale stejně jsem s ním dokázal to hrát hry, no.
That was removed in the...
Já jo, s nejhorší rolí, vole, topem.
A Season 11 item rework was Athene's Unholy Grail. Many of you, especially those of you out...
To je i ten podle toho, vole, youtubera, že, který hrál Vovko dřív a dneska má jakýsi kult, nebo co.
Out there that may Nami will remember this being your go-to support option. It was similar to what we have nowadays with Moonstone, but what you might not know is that this wasn't always your support option that the enchanter would build. Instead, Athene's actually started out as a mid-lane item.
To stavili všichni midařinou na regen. Tady ten malý kalíček a pak z něj udělali velký kalíček.
Back in 2013 to 2015, often this was your first choice as potentially a Syndra or Orianna mid lane. The reason this was so good is that it gave a decent amount of AP as well as a very strong mana passive. Again, we have this system still today. What we have in the presence of Mind Rune now was attached to Athene's. It also gave magic resistance, which is very important because if...
Si nepamatuju, že by Presence of Mind byl v tom Athenem už. To už je tak dávno, ty vole.
If you're laning against another AP champion in the mid lane, that champion that built Athene's versus the champion that didn't would have a huge advantage. So both mids would typically rush.
A myslím, že ten Athene's dával dokonce ještě rezisty, že to fakt musel prostě, že to navíc to byl tak dobrý item. To ti dávalo mana regen, rezisty, AP, když tradeil, taky to regenovalo manu ještě víc. To prostě musel jít každý midař, no. Kdyby udělal něco jako Blizzard a udělali v LoL Classic, tak bych to asi průbnul. On to někdo dělal nějaký 2 roky dozadu nebo 3 a Riot jim to zatrhnul, no. Že udělali LoLku ze Season 1 a chvilku tam i pár lidí hrálo. Jsem viděl nějaký videa, ale na YouTube nějaký si kanál, kde jsou i záznamy z toho, jak to hrajou lidi, ale zrušilo to Riot, no.
That meta of building Athene.
Já bych si to taky zahrál, ale těžko říct, jestli by nás to bavilo, hoši, no. A se takhle jako zpětně skrz, vole, nostalgický brejličky si všichni říkají, že by si to zahráli, ale jaká by byla realita, no, jak moc by nás to bavilo.
Was deemed a little bit unhealthy from Riot, which is understandable, so then that would be transferred into the Abyssal Scepter meta, which again was a huge part of League of Legends mid lane history, but a lot of people have forgot about it. Abyssal Scepter was...
Tomu se říkalo Abychcalka. Abychcal Scepter. Nebo tak já jsem tomu říkal, no teda.
Meta defining for several years. It was kind of like this. Either you rushed Abyssal Scepter and you could win the matchup, or you didn't and you would lose.
To byl jeden ze 2 itemů, který dávali rezisty a AP. Dneska máš jenom jeden item, co dává rezisty a AP. A to je Banshee. Pak už nic není, ne? Když jsi APčem, kdo chce rezisty, tak máš jeden item, no.
Another thing I forgot a lot about is being able to buy more potions. You know how they're limited to 5 and they currently cost 50 gold? Well, that's a slap in the face to old League of Legends. They were 35 gold each and had no limit. A legitimate opening strategy for Mordekaiser.
10 potek skoupil za Mordeho. Byla taková meta jednu dobu, že všichni topaři koupili na začátku hry prostě 10 nebo 15 potek nebo tak něco. Jak byli levný, ještě jak jich mohl koupit prostě úplně hromadu.
Keep in mind this was the rework Mordekaiser, not even the dragon summoning one, was 13 health potions. It wasn't just about 13 health potions Mordekaiser though. Commonly scaling champions like Veigar, Kassadin, or Kayle could start an item called Crystalline Flask. This was the
Dostal 225 a ty jsi k tomu koupil ještě dalších 6 potek, no, nebo kolik. A mohl na léně prostě sustainit, 2 dny a jenom farmit.
Predecessor to Corrupting Potion. It didn't do any damage or have a burn, but you could buy more potions on top of it. You could go Flask, Health
Jsi vzal Kassadina nebo tohle a mohl farmit 30 minut. Já musel zresetovat vůbec, no.
Pots, mana pots, and wards. Buying potions was much more common and more utilized during the early game, and it was a much bigger portion of laning phase. Speaking of Mordekaiser, let's talk about him as well as some other champions and abilities from the past. During the 2015 Mordekaiser Juggernaut rework, he became Riot's first attempt as a melee.
To je Morde s drakem, no. To není tak dávno. Dobře, tak už tak 6 let, no.
Bot laner. Their way of forcing him into the bot lane meta was just by making him blatantly overtuned, which is a great way to balance your game, by the way. Also,
Snad dojde parodie, no. Že Mordekaiser bronze byl strašně silný, protože ti bronzáci umírali jen od toho draka.
So this dude could summon the freaking dragon. Man, this was a crazy time. On live, Darius
Ten drak byl OP jak svině, no.
E is a
Jednu dobu, pak ho nerfli.
strong and annoying ability to some of you, but trust me, you have no idea just how buggy and BS this used to be. This used to be
Darius Ečko, no. To je ten klip jeden, jak Darius přitáhne do fontány 5 lidí přes celou mapu.
the most horrendous ability in the entire game. You could dash or flash out of the pool. You would clearly not be in it.
Tohle se stávalo furt, no.
And he would pull you anyway. And this would happen all the time. If you never experienced this, you are so lucky.
To jsem zažil.
Nowadays, you guys know Nidalee as a high-skilled jungler, and she's not really present in any other roles.
Se hrál víc jako AD na topu, no, v té době.
However, for about the first 5 years of her existence, she was not a jungler at all, but instead a solo laner. Well, a lot of it had to do with the fact that she didn't have access to her ultimate until level 6, whereas today she has access to it at level 1. When you were stuck in human form, it would have been really difficult to clear the jungle, and her spears did like 3 times as much damage and had 3 times the width on the hitbox, thus making her a very good poke mid laner, and also a bit of a hybrid.
Byla midař chvilku, byla topař midař, no, prvních 5-6 sezon Lolka. Pak ji z ní udělali jenom junglera.
Bruiser top laner as well. Ever since her release, Lissandra
Těma jíma spírama byla jako dost ikonická, no. Ty byly fakt strašně silný. Jako i dneska může být tak silná, ale musí se fakt strašně feednout, no.
is more or less the same champion. She's always been a pretty strong mid laner and feels pretty good to play, but she's had a
Lissandra je úplně stejná, vole, do dneška, ne?
couple of quality of life buffs that have been pretty decent. For
Jo, tu pasivku, že ji přidali.
example, her ultimate, by the way, did not use to heal her at all, and her passive is completely different. It's still a bit of a weird passive. These ice thralls don't always help you and they can be a bit glitchy, but it's better than her ult.
Jako když zabiješ v teamfightu 2 lidi, tak ti ice trollové, nebo co to je, tak ti udělají strašně moc, ale.
Passive, which is to say that she used to not even really have one. It was a
Jsem tak hledal v podstatě pentu, no, přesto.
horrendously boring passive, and a game where passives are usually now an entire extra ability. Well, then again, Nasus's passive is still this.
Jo, Nasusova pasivka je, že dostává lifesteal. Ambessa má dash po každém spelu a Nasus dostává lifesteal.
Nasus's passive is still this. There was a period of time where Lux had
A je to dobrá pasivka, ty vole. To máš jak Bloodthirster, že? Tohle to jsou staty, který dává Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster dává 15% lifesteal. Nasus má 19 z pasivky. To je furt dobrý, ne?
passive is still this. There was a period of time where Lux had resets. Her ultimate has always had a pretty low cooldown, but they gave her a buff where getting a takedown would lower the ult cooldown even more, and she could start shooting 2 lasers during one team fight, or, in this crazy ARAM clip, 3 times.
Not really working out, as the depth charge will be enough, and Zeus gets here on time, and that Tryndamere is just not doing damage in the backline. Will be able to take out Faker's clone, but that is it, and that doesn't count.
Something that Shaco, LeBlanc, and Wukong players take for granted these days is that their clone abilities are rather good, especially if the Shaco is playing AP Shaco. It can be very strong if used properly, but as ridiculous as this might sound to a brand new player, the clones did not used to show jungle buffs. If the Shaco or LeBlanc or Wukong had a red buff, the clone would not, making it very easy to discern the real one from the fake. If you don't think League of Legends has come a long way, just look at this Reddit post from 9 years ago. Someone was
Shacovi klony by měly ukazovat jungle campy, jinak to zabíjí jeho účel. Je to
able to get 91 upvotes saying in response to a question about why the clones don't have buffs, saying we don't need buffs in reference to Shaco not needing to be more powerful. The world of League of Legends is completely different today. If this was somehow bugged out or LeBlanc clones didn't show buffs, and which is really stupid, I agree, it would be the #1 thing complained about on Reddit every day until it got changed. The jungle itself could be an entire video all on its own as it's been changed over 100 times, but let's talk about this a little
Je to tak, no, všechny ty změny jsem zažil už.
bit. What in the world is happening on your screen?
To bylo úplně normální, to když jsem hrál normálně ještě e-sport v Česku, tak to jsme má dělali. To dělala naše botlinka tady to, no. Že já jsem si dával tady redko třeba, že jo, a oni šli prostě zabít tady camp. A ještě swapovali, takže šli na top, no. Třeba se dělal furt, prostě to byl standard, i v solo queue.
Why in this pro game are people who aren't jungle taking jungle camps at the
Já ještě se farmilo ve dvou, no, taky.
start of the game? As I said, throughout the years, all of the changes to jungle have been very complicated, but I'll do my best to TLDR. Firstly, you did not need a jungle item or smite or anything special to get full experience on jungle camps. Secondly, you did not need to get the last hit on the camps to get experience. The experience that you would get, much like lane minions, was shared with nearby allies.
Jo, ono se to shareovalo, no, ty XP, takže ono se vyplatilo prostě jít junglerem farmit první 3 campy nebo kolik, nebo celou jungli možná. A pak ten topař naportil prostě na linku, no až. Teďka už ty XP dostává jenom ten, kdo to zabije ten camp, no. A když to zabije jungler s tím itemem, tak z toho má daleko víc než ten, kdo to nezabil bez itemu, že?
Which meant that when you leashed your jungler during the early game,
to už si jakoby taky ohlídali tady to, no, aby se nedělalo prostě.
you did have to be careful to not take XP. An early game opening looking something like this was very common and meta in professional play during late Season 5 in the World Championship. The bot lane would typically start something like the Krug camp because remember, they didn't split up a bunch of times, and the top laner would do what we call double jungling with the jungler, typically following them around and helping them clear 2 to 3.
Jo, topař si dal jeden camp, dostal z něho level 2 hnedka, recallnul, koupil potky, naportil na lineu s levelem 2.
3 camps, and then what the top laner would do is
tak se to dělalo. Proto dneska ti ten jungle item ho potřebuješ, abys dostal level up a ostatní z něj level up už nedostanou.
Back to lane
aby nemohli dělat tohle.
With a Doran's Blade and 5 potions and level 2. Although it might make sense to
všechno má svůj důvod, no.
you that having a Doran's item and 5 potions would be a big advantage, it still seems a little weird and not worth it because you'd have to waste your very long teleport cooldown. Except the way that teleport used to work is that teleporting to turrets would reduce its cooldown. It had about half the cooldown it does now during the early game.
Když naporčil na turretu, tak ti to vrátilo 100 sekund z cooldownu. Cooldown refounded for cancelling teleport reduced to... Takže ze 150 se to snížilo na 100 sekund. Takže to mělo menší cooldown jak 2 minuty. Jo, jako na turretu to dávalo, to snížilo cooldown, no. Jak dlouho měl teleport cooldown, ty vole, ani nevím.
Seriously. Let's talk about some global objectives. How about we first talk about dragons? You veterans will remember when Dragon used to give global gold and that's it.
Dával jen goldy, Drak dal 1500 goldů týmu. Každý z něho dostal 3 killa. Každý z něho dostal kill, jakoby. A to bylo všechno, no. Na nic jiného se Drak nepoužíval. Na nic jiného Drak nebyl, jakoby prvních 6-5 sezon Lolka asi tak.
But the big question is, what did dragons do between just being a global gold objective and the elemental drakes? Well, back in 2015, dragons were reworked to have some extra bonuses. The stacking
tak v season 5, no.
was rather linear, where each team tried to just get as many as possible, and these bonuses were interesting. The first dragon stack would give your team basically what Infernal Drake does now, but the second one, if you were able to take it, gave your team increased damage to minions and monsters, which is extremely interesting because we have not seen this in the game since. Sure, it's true we have Minion Dematerializer, but nothing that helps you clear jungle camps faster as well, which is super cool. The third stack was like Cloud Dragon, except the movement speed was not for out of combat, it was just permanent.
Bylo určený, co každý drag dává, co dává první, druhý i třetí, teďka je to random, no, zase. Byl tam ten pátý, ten co dával, byl tam něco jako Elder, ale už nejsem jistý, on to asi řekne
Bonus
ještě.
damage to turrets. If you played back in season 6 and 7, you'll remember this is the old thing that Mountain Dragon used to give, damage to objectives. Finally, if a team achieved a 5th dragon, it was an Elder buff. It was temporary, just as it is now, and did not have that execute on it. But what it did was triple all your other bonuses during that time, and very similar to how getting Elder in today's game is basically GG.
Vím, že vlastně na tom peči jsme hráli nějakou kvalifikaci na hitpoint, tomu něco takového, jakože, že to bylo úplně nový tady tohle z toho tady ti draci, a že jsme na tom hráli nějakou kvalu na hitpoint, jako do svitav, a že jsme měli těch 5 draků a s těma 5 jsme vyhráli hru nějakou si rozhodující, no. A že to bylo jako strašně nový. Jsme hráli nějakou 60 minutovku. Chlastalo se tam, nevím, já jsem tam nechlastalo, ale já mluvím ještě o, když jsme ještě hráli jakou kvalu tam, chápeš?
It kinda was back then too. The addition of Elder really helped close
Jako prostě zápas, který nás tam dostal.
out those long games and add in something else to do late game instead of just taking Baron. The final thing I want to talk about today is the most interesting to me personally.
Ale nebylo to teda tak silný jako Elder, ale bylo to hodně silný. To.
It's Rift Herald, because I feel like the league player base has totally forgot just how much Herald has
Jo, ten Herald, ten byl tak ošklivý.
changed. Even though it wasn't that long ago compared to stuff from Season 2, for example, for some reason people forget that Herald was not always what it is now. When Herald was added on 5.22 for Preseason 6, it was a lot more like a typical dragon type of buff. It granted global gold to your team and a 2-minute temporary buff, which increased your damage by 10%, gave you movement speed, it gave you the empowered Baron recall, and it gave nearby minions some extra attack speed to help push. It's also worth noting that you could get Herald more than just twice because it spawned at 4 minutes and then respawned every 5 minutes. The reason that Herald was changed is because, well, to put it frankly, it wasn't a very good objective. Sure, the buff was nice and all, but it only lasted for 2 minutes and most people did not view it as worth taking at the time. You had to bring your whole team there to get the most value out of it. Very quickly into Season 6, it was totally reimagined. Now there was only one Rift Herald spawn because instead of a 2-minute buff to your whole team, it gave a 20-minute buff for one person. This buff was retained on death, so if you did get this buff at 10 minutes, you genuinely had Rift Herald buff until 30 minutes. So what did this 20-minute buff give you? Well, it was supposed to be helpful for split pushing and dueling. It was sort of a hullbreaker type of effect. While no allies were nearby, you gained 5%
A to asi spíš lepší na topaře než na junglera, no, tady to.
damage reduction and a pretty strong damaging energized effect, which also worked against structures. I remember this being really good for top laners.
To má backstep damage dokonce. Jakože damage zezadu, to má jenom Shaco, že jo, v té hře. Zajímavé.
If you were able to secure the Herald buff splitting for the next 20 minutes, it would feel so much better. You could even win some 1v1s in the side lane that
Nebo ne, to je damage do toho Heralda, jakoby, jasně.
you normally wouldn't if you had the Herald to your advantage. If that sounds toxic or hard to balance or unfun to play against because the Fiora now has a 20-minute Herald making her even more impossible to 1v1, that's because you're exactly right. That's why it was changed, and once again why we have Herald what it is today. What they ended up changing Herald into is honestly in the perfect spot. It's important, strong, and matters enough to grab and push a lead, but if you do trade off a 2nd or even 3rd dragon for 2nd Herald, it definitely comes with a price, which is exactly how it should work. I would say they did an incredible job making sure Herald is a great global objective for the game. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments down below. Let me know what I left out, and if you like this
No, tak tady ten nás je tohle Heralda ani skoro nepamatuju. Jestli byl v té hře jenom season 6, tak to už jako sorry, to už je 8 let. A vím, že to nebylo, jako, že to tam moc nestálo a že to strašně rychle změnili na toho, co tam je teď. No něco tomu podobného, no.
video, please feel free to give me some stuff and I'll talk about it in the next one. I can continue this series. There's so much in Old League. There's a ton of things that I did not go into, which I would love to talk about. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful start to your fall, and I'll see you soon.
Dobré videjko, dáme lajkos. Jako v tom starém Lolku to je strašně moc. Myslím, že i itemy, co tam byly před 3 rokama, tak už se, já nevím kolik, 20 z nich tam není, že? Protože tenhle rok to se taky měnili, vole. 4 roky dozadu to taky měnili, 5 let dozadu taky něco dělali jinýho, vole. Teďka nejnovější itemy, co jsou, tak je ten Storm Surge. Luden je zase úplně nové, já nevím kolik toho přidali zase, vole, že? Tam se dá vyhrabat, má stovky itemů a změn. Člověk ani neví, kde by začal, vole, v tomhle. Pak má někdo začínat nový, dřív to ještě vypadalo docela přehledně. Všechno to je přehledný, jenom furt mějí ty itemy, no. To mě docela štve, že mějí každý rok itemy, v podstatě. Nebo každý 2 minimálně. Zase jako je ta hra víc fresh, to se mi líbí, když to takhle změní. A 2 týdny máš prostě pocit, že hraješ novou hru docela, když tam jsou nový itemy. Ale asi to není hezký pro nováčky, no, který třeba začali zrovna a hrajou to měsíc. A zase jim mění itemy, ne? Ale zase, ta hra ti sama doporučuje, jaký máš stavět itemy. Jak jsme se bavili o tom, že ta hra dřív byla těžší v tom, co máš stavět, co všechno máš vědět, a že těžší bylo makro a všecko, tak dneska zase ty itemy jsou, ty buildy ti to říká, jaký máš stavět. Dřív tam nic takového nebylo, tam nebyly žádný doporučený itemy.
Hrál s někým, kdo byl first time, stavil prostě na Luxku Tormail, vole. Dneska už ten blbček, co to hraje poprvé, ví, že co má jít, no, protože mu to ta hra prostě ukáže, vole. Ale mechanicky je ta hra daleko těžší zase, no, dneska to. Jsou ale stránky na buildy pro postižený tím, že nejhranější jsou ty doporučení. Já koukám na profesora, no. Tam máš vždycky třeba 6 buildů různých a vždycky nějaké vyberu, které mi přijde nejlepší. Runy myslíš? Tak runy, no. Ty doporučení jsou většinou v pohodě. V tom problém nevidím. Spíš ty buildy, no. Itemové. Nic. Čus.